sitting up here with the panel. Mr. Benner will introduce them each as he begins his remarks. And then after their brief remarks each, they will also have a bit of a panel discussion among themselves. After that panel discussion, I will come up and we'll take questions from the media. So hold your questions if you would until that time. And please, as always, try to keep them on the topic that we're here to discuss today. And then at the very end, after we've wrapped questions, we'll invite our local law enforcement partners to come up behind the panel and join them for a photo spray so that we can all make sure to get a shot of everyone together to highlight our collaboration today. So with that, I'm very happy to turn it over to Homeland Security Investigations Acting Executive Associate Director, Derek Benner.
Thank you. Good morning. First of all, I want to thank everyone at ICE, Homeland Security Investigations Cybercrime Center for hosting us today on rather short notice and setting up this format. The opioid and fentanyl crisis is an urgent public health and safety issue, and the Cybercrime Center plays a critical role in our efforts to investigate and dismantle these trafficking networks. I also want to thank our partners in the room, and we've asked each of them to share some of their unique perspectives on the opioid crisis and to discuss strategies that their organizations are pursuing that will support the President's opioid response initiative. Following the opening remarks, as Jen said, we'll have some time for an open discussion among all the participants in the room, and then we'll be happy to answer any questions after that. I'm very pleased to introduce Congresswoman Barbara Comstock from Virginia's 10th Congressional District. Thank you for joining us. Tracy McCormick, First Assistant U.S. Attorney for the Eastern District of Virginia. Welcome. Richard Baum, the Acting Director of the Office of National Drug Control Policy. Welcome, Richard. Special Agent in Charge, P.J. Leckleitner from Homeland Security Investigations Washington, D.C. Field Office. And Special Agent in Charge Andre Watson from Homeland Security Investigations Baltimore, Maryland office. I also want to recognize our local partners who are here today. Deputy Chief Patel of the Prince George's Police Department, Lieutenant Colonel David Ruel, Chief of the Criminal Investigations Bureau for the Maryland State Police. Welcome. Sheriff Chapman and Major Fiano of the Loudoun County Sheriff's Office. Chief Mosier of Fauquier County. Welcome, Chief. Lieutenant Joe Cantor, Arlington Police Department. And Chief Maggie DeBoard, Herndon Police Department. Welcome. Again, thank you all for being here today. We are proud to partner with you on combating the opioid and fentanyl epidemic in our communities. Yesterday, President Trump declared a national public health emergency to address the growing opioid crisis that has gripped the United States over the past few years. By mobilizing his entire administration to address drug addiction and opioid abuse, President Trump's action allows for expanded access to services and options commonly used for substance abuse or mental health treatment. From coast to coast, American communities are being ripped apart by a steady influx of illegal and deadly narcotics. Chief among them, heroin and synthetic opioid fentanyl. Fentanyl, as we know, is 50 times more potent than heroin and 100 times more potent than morphine. It's no wonder that synthetic opioid-related overdoses have skyrocketed in recent years. For fiscal year 17, ICE's Homeland Security Investigations seized 219 kilograms of fentanyl. Sadly, that's equivalent to 219 million dosage units of this dangerous narcotic. The issue is a priority for Homeland Security Investigations because chief among our critical mission areas is the investigation, disruption, and dismantling of the transnational criminal organizations that illicitly produce fentanyl and heroin and other dangerous opioids into the U.S., certainly affecting the health and safety of the communities that we serve. Because of our nexus to the border and our mandate to enforce more than 400 federal statutes, HSI's role in the President's strategy starts well beyond our borders. In an effort to prevent dangerous drugs and those engaged in the trafficking and distribution of contraband from reaching our shores, the idea that ICE employs is to push our borders out and do as much work with our international partners to prevent the entry of these dangerous synthetic narcotics. Our efforts to disrupt the supply of those deadly substances are an important complement to the President's commitment to public health and safety, as detailed in yesterday's announcement from the White House. It's certainly time to leverage as many resources as we can to hit back and stop this epidemic from spreading any further than it already has. As a first step in response to the President's announcement, the Cybercrime Center, where we sit today, will serve as ground zero in our efforts to attack the fentanyl issue where it originates, the dark web. C3 will expand its efforts to offer investigative support and darknet training to our state, local, and international partners. We will also complement this with training focused on the illicit payment networks and financial systems associated with fentanyl smuggling and the distribution networks. In addition, ICE is increasing its enforcement efforts along other avenues. In the area of finance, our agents and investigators will leverage important relationships with the financial industry to cut TCO's access to the financial systems. We will use innovative techniques to limit their access to expanding the virtual currency market. International. HSI offices in China, Mexico, and Canada are working with our partners on the front lines to address the opioid trafficking epidemic, and we leverage strong relationships with our foreign counterparts to drive enforcement, enhance intelligence sharing, and initiate joint enforcement operations to stem the flow to our shores and our borders. ICE also works with our host governments through our transnational criminal investigative units to disrupt the distribution of fentanyl. And the most important thing, in my mind, for HSI, for Homeland Security Investigations, is the critical partnerships with our state, local, and federal partners. This is where we will achieve the most success. And that is why we are offering the Cybercrime Center as our first step in building capacity for all of our efforts. Share best practices, share technology advancements, and work together to attack the problem from where it originates. Domestically, ICE's Border Enforcement Security Task Force program is another platform that we use to investigate the organizations that are exploiting our borders. And that will be another area where we will look to expand our footprint to address the President's proclamation yesterday. Thank you once again for joining us, and I'm pleased to introduce Congresswoman Comstock to say a few words.
Thank you, and good morning, and wonderful to be with you here today, and thank you for hosting us, and thank you for your leadership role in what we know is going to be a continued and amplified and very much an important piece of this approach on how we are going to tackle this national public health emergency. We know that this is a 360-degree approach that we need to have to this, everybody in the community. So we understand this is one piece, but it's a very important piece. Like probably everybody who is watching or with us, every family knows a family member or friend who has been, is battling addiction. I mean, it is a disease, and how we are battling that addiction, whether it's heroin or opioids, or in the past, we have meth. This is something where we need to bring it out of the shadows, and we need to deal with it in a very comprehensive way. I've been privileged in this district to work with so many of you all here today. Sheriff Chapman and I have worked together on this for several years now. He started the heroin operations team in Loudoun, which is very much, if he had his circle here that he shows, his graph, it shows how we bring the whole community together, because we know we can't arrest our way out of this. We need to use our computer assets and use all of our technology and stop it from getting in here. We need to have our police resources there, but then we need to have the important intervention and the prevention and the diversion into treatment. And that's a lot of what we have been talking about over the past several years. This is something I worked on before I was in Congress, but we've continued to do this. And this coordination is very key. And the legislation that we passed last year, the Comprehensive Recovery and Addiction Act, as well as the 21st Century Cures Act, was designed very much to be a comprehensive approach. And so I'm very excited and was at the White House yesterday when the President declared this national opioid epidemic a public health emergency, because now we're going to be able to take this 360-degree approach and put it on well, I don't want to say steroids because we don't want to put it on drugs, right? So we want to really really amplify this and strengthen our approach on how we tackle this public health emergency. So with 175 deaths a day, I believe it is now, and with the fentanyl problem just bringing it all back, we know this is going to take all of us in every aspect. And I think I can tell you, having spoken to leadership about this, and when we've had events, I've been able to bring in constituents of mine who are very active in working in the recovery effort, that you have the support of Congress and our leadership. You heard the President yesterday speak about this in very personal terms, and how his own family had people dealing with addiction, and a brother who died of that addiction. And that is something that's we need to bring out of the shadows, because something that I know Sheriff Chapman and I have seen, and this summer when we did a couple of roundtables where we were out in Winchester as well as in Loudoun County, and I've done them with Pat Harity in Fairfax, and then I've been in Prince William. But we see those faces of addiction, and it's very important that this effort brings those families and those people out of the shadows, and they realize that they aren't alone, that the families aren't alone, that the people battling addiction aren't alone, and that we want to have a system here to help. But part of that system is going to be to keep those drugs out of their hands in the first place, to prevent it, to have families understand how dangerous and just highly, highly addictive these new drugs are in a very different way than we've ever seen before. So I really appreciate this community-wide effort, this national effort, and it is going to take all of us at the state, local, and federal level coordinating and maximizing these resources. And I really appreciate the opportunity to be here today to hear from all of you. So thank you.
Thank you, Congresswoman. Thank you very much. I'd now like to introduce Richard Baum, Acting Director of the Office of National Drug Control Policy. Richard, thank you for joining us today.
Great. Well, great to be here, and thank you so much to ICE for hosting us and for the incredible work ICE does nationwide and worldwide on the drug problem. And I should just say I've been to the JFK mail facility, and I see U.S. federal agents, including ICE folks and Customs Border Protection, U.S. Post Office, trying to catch these very small shipments of fentanyl. 10 grams, it's about 2 teaspoons, is enough of fentanyl to kill thousands of people. It's thousands of doses, and it's an enormous challenge, and totally agree with the point about finding those dark web sites and clearinghouses and closing them down. Already, the federal law enforcement has ended impunity on the dark web by taking down Alpha Bay, but there's more work to be done, and it's great that there's this center here to sort of drive that action forward. So let me say a word about yesterday. Yesterday was a very important day at the White House. The President and the First Lady's personal commitment to the drug issue is very important to all of us around the country who work on the drug issue. I've been involved for many years. I'm a career official at ONDCP. President Trump asked me to serve as acting director back in March, and we are working very hard with his whole team to drive action. But that use of the bully pulpit by the President is really critical to help organize and push action. And let me say, the way he talks about the drug issue in public yesterday is the same way he talks about it privately in meetings at the White House. He wants to turn this problem around. He's challenging and pushing us hard, all his senior staff and team, to do whatever it takes to turn this crisis around. Totally unacceptable amount of death and fatalities related to drugs in this country, and we have a lot of work to do. I think there's a natural question after the emergency declaration announcement about resources committed to the issue. And I wanted to say, the president proposed for FY18 $28.7 billion total drug budget. Our office at ONDCP puts out the information about the interagency efforts on drugs. We're spending $10.8 billion is our proposal for drug treatment. It's record amounts. And when I travel the country and talk to people in police offices, sheriff's offices, drug treatment centers, recovery, prevention places, some of that money is coming through and is supporting efforts. And it's not that there isn't a lot of important things already happening in the community. Communities see what's happening to their citizens. They're meeting, they're getting together, they're pooling resources, and they're responding. So there's a lot of really important action occurring at the state and local level and by NGOs and other organizations. So I would say it's sort of overall, we're already doing more than we've ever done before against drugs, but it's not nearly enough. The scale of the problem is so great that we need to look for what else we can do, and that's what President Trump has asked us to do. I know in the administration we'll be working very closely with the Congress to make sure we have all the resources we need to turn this around. In addition to this work and planning in the administration, our office, ONDCP, and other federal partners, we're working very closely with the President's Opioid Commission. Next week, November 1st, Governor Christie and the commission members will release their report. ONDCP, my office, is supporting the commission. I'm serving concurrently as executive director of the President's Commission. We're making sure that the commissioners have all the information they need, and I have a good sense of where they're headed. And I think the report that comes out November 1st, and in combination with what the president announced yesterday, is really going to be a powerful motivation and incentive for all of us to push for what comes next. So there's a lot happening. There's a lot more that's coming over these next few weeks. My office is already also putting together President Trump's national drug control strategy, which will come out early next year. So I guess I just want to wrap up to say that we understand how much pain and suffering there is around the country. We also know how hard people are working in local communities to try and turn it around. And I just want to say, I think it was clear from what President Trump said yesterday, everyone out in the community working on this problem, they have a strong partner and friend in the White House, and we'll be with you trying to drive action, drive solution, drive resources to turn around this crisis. Thank you.
Lincoln, I would like to add another plug and really thank Richard for being present in our community. Now, the first time we met was you were out at a national drug take-back day, and
Right,
you were in Loudoun, so it wasn't planned. You were there for the day, spending there working with our sheriff and just being there watching and seeing what was going on in the community. And then you came out and spent a day with Sheriff Chapman and I and out in Winchester, where we met with a lot of local recovery people. So I really appreciate how you have personally localized this and really familiarized yourself with everything going on in our region.
And
so
important to mention, we have another take-back day tomorrow, right? So it's important for folks to bring their unused medications. I mean, the reason we got into this opioid crisis was this excessive prescribing of these medications, and the fact that these medications are around our homes and people are getting into them. So if you have medications that you're not using, please bring them in tomorrow. Around the country there'll be sites, and keep them safe, because those are very powerful and dangerous medications.
Great. Thank you, Richard. Appreciate it. I'm happy to introduce next First Assistant U.S. Attorney for the Eastern District of Virginia, Tracy McCormick. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for having me today. Regrettably, our U.S. Attorney couldn't make it. This is a topic he cares deeply about, and he's spoken about many times. So today I'm just here to listen to the participants, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak about it. So at the end of the day, we are facing a crisis of opioid addiction and overdose. The numbers are startling. They've been said many times. I think last year we lost 64,000 Americans to overdose alone. In Virginia, 663 lives were lost to opioids. So, to say the least, we can and must do better. As the President said yesterday, ending this epidemic will require resolve. It will require our resolve, the resolve of the country, the mobilization of governments, the private sector, and the local communities. No one can do it alone. So any counter-illicit narcotics strategy has many components to it. There's education and treatment so that we can stop kids from starting. It's also to start best practices such as prescription. It also includes treatment. We have to get help to the folks who need it. Critically today, we're going to talk about a component which is law enforcement, absolutely critical component to a counter-narcotics illicit drug strategy. The U.S. Attorney's Office supports our law enforcement partners at the federal level, including HSI, DEA, FBI, and our many state and local partners, the Sheriff's Office and the police departments. We support them in rigorously targeting the illegal narcotics supply chain. With these long-standing partnerships, we have prosecuted and will prosecute street dealers, gang members who distribute drugs, dirty doctors and pharmacists, all the way up to dismantling the cartels and the drug trafficking organizations who flood the nation with narcotics. From the top of the chain to the bottom, we'll work to identify, dismantle, and hold accountable those responsible. This crisis has actually touched all of us. As the folks up here have said, I don't think anyone here has escaped it. And to those who live in the communities hardest hit, it is truly terrifying. We can and must confront and defeat this. And to do so, we have to have the courage and commitment of all of us. So thank you for including me again in this very important conversation today.
Thank you, Tracy, and thank you for your partnership. It goes a long way to bring us all together through the U.S. Attorney's Office, so thank you. Next is our Special Agent in Charge for Washington, D.C. and Virginia, Mr. Lechleitner.
Thank you, Mr. Benner. PJ Lechleitner, I'm the Special Agent in Charge for D.C. and Virginia. I'd like to say good morning to all the esteemed colleagues and our state and local partners. It's vitally important we get together on this, and we are. HSI leverages our strong relationships at the state, local level with our federal partners and also with the foreign partners. We do this from all of our Special Agent in Charge and all of our various offices, both myself and SAC Watson. We do it in the NCR, and we work very closely together. We have globally, we have well over 100 active investigations, specifically targeting darknet illicit networks, and most of those are related to fentanyl or related contraband. And in all cases, we deconflict and partner to combat the problem. This is not something that can be done by any one agency, or quite frankly, anyone in any one jurisdiction or any one government. I mean, it's a very, very large problem. Those partnerships include HIDTA task forces, electronic crimes task forces, gang task forces, financial task forces. It really crosses the spectrum. From HSI, we provide expertise and training and assistance to our state and local partners, federal partners, foreign partners, and specifically here locally, we do that as much as we can. It relates to financial and darknet arenas, and also online undercover work to target these issues. The cryptocurrency expertise we provide, blockchain exploitation tools, and we also holistically from the agency level founded a money service business initiative, and that's really going after the data analysis to target these networks. It's really very complex work. It's something that a lot of police agencies are struggling to get their arms around, but the collaborative efforts we're involved with are really producing some good efforts and good results. So, like I said, it's a global problem, but I wanted to just use one example from one of our field offices to really kind of illustrate just what kind of a problem this is, and it's a good result. So in North Dakota, on September 20th, 2017, 10 subjects were federally indicted in the District of North Dakota. They were indicted for possession with the intent to distribute controlled substances, namely heroin and fentanyl. To date, that investigation has resulted in 31 federal indictments, 21 criminal arrests, and 20 convictions, along with the seizure of more than $1 million in street value of fentanyl. Case began a couple years ago in North Dakota from a local hit from the state and local partners. This is where this stuff starts. We can't do it without our state and local partners, quite frankly. This case, so far, we've identified 4 overdose deaths directly related to these conspirators. It started from the Organized Crime Drug Enforcement Task Force investigation and spun out from there. Through ongoing investigations and interviews and evidence collection, we determined that the material was coming from Asia, China specifically, and it was involving communication through U.S. networks via encrypted communications, and they were using our own mail and parcel services against us. These are very diversified networks. They send very small shipments, and they're very difficult to track. As referenced before, our partnerships with the Postal Service, Customs and Border Protection, DEA, we're able to drill down on that and attempt to discover these shipments, but they're legion. There's a lot of them. And I just want to close with, this would not be possible without the great collaboration and teamwork of all of our partners, the state and local, federal, and foreign. And this particular investigation and many others that are going on that are very similar to it exemplify the steadfast commitment of HSI and the law enforcement community to tackling this problem. Thank you.
Thank you, PJ. And you know, to Tracy's point, this case is a great example of an all-of-government investigative effort with DEA and CBP, the U.S. Attorney's Office, supported by everybody. And so this is probably, when we do our roundtable, this is probably something we need to talk about as how do we do more of those joint investigative efforts. Thank you, PJ. I'd like to introduce our special agent in charge for Baltimore, Maryland, Mr. Andre Watson.
Thank you, Mr. Benner. Good morning, panel members. Good morning, everybody. Again, my name is Andre Watson, and I am the Special Agent in Charge for Homeland Security Investigations, Baltimore, Maryland. I cover the entire state of Maryland, and I have the pleasure of leading the men and women in that field office in close coordination with our federal, state, and local partners. We participate in a variety of task forces in the state of Maryland and across the country. And these task forces are not limited to the Organized Crime and Drug Enforcement Task Force, led by the Department of Justice, the Homeland Security Investigations Border Enforcement Security Task Force, as well as the High Intensity Drug Trafficking Area Initiative. HSI special agents are working in tandem with our federal, state, local, and international partners to target shipments of Chinese-sourced opiates, precursors, as well as narcotic analogs that are being introduced into the United States via express mail shipments and U.S. mail. We are collaborating proactively with the National Targeting Center, as well as the Special Operations Division Enterprise, to share actionable intelligence and information and target those that are responsible for the illicit introduction of dangerous opioids into the United States. In addition to those efforts, we're utilizing our partnerships to share information and intelligence on transnational criminal organizations and associates that are utilizing the darknet as well as the illicit online marketplace to order dangerous narcotics and facilitate payment via virtual currency, to include Bitcoin, and launder proceeds of this unlawful activity. An example that I would like to highlight of our successful collaboration involves our investigation of a United States citizen by the name of Justin Larson. He was a resident of Montgomery County in Maryland, and he was responsible for the importation and distribution of Chinese-sourced fentanyl throughout the National Capital Region. We teamed with our state and local partners, and we were able to identify overdose incidents, several of which in Montgomery County, that identified Larson as the distributor responsible for fentanyl being supplied to those victims. One of those victims, which was a juvenile, was unfortunately treated and ultimately recovered. But nevertheless, there was a death that was associated to Mr. Larson. Our special agents and task force officers worked hand in hand with the U.S. Attorney's Office for the District of Maryland, and we were able to identify that Mr. Larson used Hushmail, which is an encrypted email service, to facilitate the importation of fentanyl, and he paid for the fentanyl by use of Western Union wire transfers as well as Bitcoin transactions. His distribution activities span a time frame of 2 years, from 2014 to 2016. And ultimately, he was charged in the U.S. District Court, District of Maryland, Greenbelt Division, for distribution of fentanyl, resulting in a death. He was convicted by a jury trial in January of 2017, and in June of 2017, he was sentenced to life in prison. This represents the first federal conviction of fentanyl distribution resulting in death in the District of Maryland. And it results in a proactive message that shows what the collaboration between our federal, state, and local partners can achieve against this growing opioid epidemic. Thank you.
Thank you, Andre. I want to open up the discussion amongst all of us in the room and take it out of the law enforcement arena for just a second, because the president talked about messaging and talked about education and public messaging, and I think there's a role for law enforcement professionals in that activity. We focus a lot on our ongoing investigations and our ongoing work. I want to throw this out to the panel and to our law enforcement partners here is, what could some of that work look like for law enforcement in terms of the messaging and the education about the dangers of these substances and systems like the dark net and dark web that are certainly out there for people's use?
Well, I'll start to try and answer that question. I think that what we have to get back to in our country is more clear and consistent messages about the inherent risks of using drugs, all drugs, especially for young people while their brains and bodies are still developing. And so to do that, we need those messages to be infused throughout our society. So in schools, in the home, in the community, and over the air, through the media and social media, just communicating the facts. I have a couple teenagers, kids are smart. We need to tell them the truth. And the truth is, these substances are very dangerous to them, and they face a serious risk of consequence with what's in today's drug supply by using these substances. On the issue of the role of police, I was just at ISCP, I think with some of my colleagues this week in the International Association of Chiefs of Police, met with our 28 HIDA directors and others. Law enforcement is shouldering a very heavy burden in this crisis and showing tremendous leadership. They're not only working to shut down drug dealing and drug trafficking in their region and working with HIDAs and other task forces, but they're also using their tremendous authority on respect in the community to help bring people together. And one of the things I've been very encouraged about is how police chiefs and sheriffs are working all over the country to divert people pre-arrest into drug treatment. There's a program called PARI, Police Assisted Addiction Recovery Initiative. It's in over 300 precincts and sheriff's offices around the country. People can walk in to a police department 24 hours a day and get transitioned right into a treatment center within an hour. And I think we need to think about more of these new pathways into treatment, and law enforcement is playing a critical role in doing this. So those are a few thoughts from me.
And I think it's an understanding that it's everywhere, and that we really need to understand it's in all of our neighborhoods. This is a very democratized problem. There's no neighborhood that it's not hitting, and how secretive it is. And so if you know somebody who's been addicted, really maybe spend some time talking to them, and what you'll hear is how they hid it from everyone they knew. Because that's one of the most painful things that families find out, is they didn't know. Or you had somebody who was in recovery and they slipped and they didn't want to tell somebody. And then, when you slip and then maybe take something again, that's when you're at a great risk. So I think it's really understanding how this is in front of all of us, but it's also so hidden. And that is a real difficulty of it when you talk to families, and it's exhausting for families to deal with. I mean, I know, and that's why they need the community support and help, because you can imagine with somebody who keeps, slipping and falling and hasn't quite gotten over this, how exhausting it is for the family to have to deal, have somebody bring him home again, have him overdose. And I've heard a lot from the police about even, now that we're using the Narcan, there are people who over and over and over get that Narcan, and people say, well, what, they just keep getting the Narcan, we bring them back. Well, we've got to bring them back one more time and find out how we're going to treat that addiction that time. So this is it's a chronic disease. You're never over it. So if you're an addict, you're never going to cure the addiction. You have to learn how to live with it, and the whole recovery effort and getting, putting faces to the recovery effort, and that there is life with addiction, and recovering, and how we do that is important too.
I was just going to add, I think those are all really important points. It's critical to keep people alive. These are people's sons and daughters, and what first responders and law enforcement are doing to carry naloxone and save people is incredible. But we also need to move people and transition them into treatment. It's true that many people, after they're reversed, do not have an epiphany and want to go straight into treatment. And there's something about the disease of addiction. But that doesn't mean we should allow them to walk away and go back to using drugs. We need to do more. And a lot of this is happening already. Hospitals and ERs are working, and police are following up. But we want someone, when they leave that hospital, to ideally go direct into treatment. If they decline treatment, first of all, they shouldn't be let out right away in hospitals. They should start treatment right in the hospitals. And then if they refuse treatment, we need to follow up and go find them. 94% of the people in this country with a substance use disorder are not seeking treatment. That's how the disease of addiction works. We have to go and find them, control them, and create these new pathways to help people before it's too late.
Thank you, Richard. Yes, sir. Yes, Sheriff.
Let me see if I can get you a mic.
Oh, yeah.
There. Or if you want to come up and speak into the mic so the folks listening can hear you.
I would agree that messaging is key, and certainly we've had the good fortune of working with Congresswoman Comstock, as well as the Drug Enforcement Administration, and certainly ONDCP. We've had the opportunity to bring the DA Museum out to Loudoun County, and we held several forums there to allow family members that have lost loved ones to come out and be part of the conversation, to discuss the pain that they've been through and what we can all do as a community to address this. We also had Project Purple, which was a Chris Herron project, which we were able to bring out a former National Basketball Association star who had come out and really packed an auditorium at one of our high schools with the kids and got that message out to the children out there about what's going on, and we've actually done some other things with the schools, showing some different videos and getting out regularly. We've teamed up with again with the DEA, and we go out to all the different high schools, and we not only address internet safety issues and what the internet is being used for out there, but we also address the drug problem as well. So I think a lot of it has to do with the messaging on the front side, the enforcement on the backside. You bring up a good point about actually what you had mentioned, Andre, about arresting folks that have supplied the drugs that have resulted in the death, and we've had some very good success with the Eastern District on that as well. So I think it is a comprehensive approach, and I think all these things are critical, and I think it's all about partnerships. It's all about working together.
Thank you, Sheriff. Great example of law enforcement engaging in the community, in the schools. Reminds me of one thing is first responders, as Richard talked about, and as executives of police agencies here, as we answer the President's call to increase our efforts to combat this problem, how do we protect our first responders and our law enforcement officers and equip them properly? Because the fentanyl substance has changed the way we do business, and I see the sheriff with a very important tool. Would love to hear some ideas and open the discussion up into making sure that the first responders are in a place to actually respond and do their job.
Oh, no,
You want to? Okay.
You show up.
No, thank you for the opportunity to talk about this very devastating issue to our nation and to our communities, local communities. What I pulled out of my pocket, folks, is an injector, and this is a Narcan injector for our law enforcement officers, and also we carry these Narcan injectors for our canines in the event that they run across fentanyl, carfentanil, heroin in the course of their daily job, and this is to protect us as we protect the community. So this is a scenario, folks, where it has to be a holistic approach. And the only thing I'll add to that piece is that we're going to continue to make arrests. We're going to continue to work with the U.S. Attorney and the Commonwealth's Attorney in Fauquier County for the prosecution of those that violate the law when it comes to drug and narcotic violations. But also the truth of the matter is people that are jailed, one day they're going to get out. And there has to be some place for them to go when they get out. And the programs that we can offer in our jails to allow them the opportunity to recover from addiction, because when they walk out, not to walk back into that same environment, kind of like you talked about a moment ago when you leave the ER. Do you go back into that same environment? Is this something that we can do together? So we have a lot of smart people in the room, and we have a lot of smart people in our communities that are willing to work together. And I think I can echo this from a law enforcement standpoint, that we want to do all that we can to be part of the solution. But we're still going to be charged with keeping our communities safe. And we will do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Sheriff. Opening up to the rest of the room in terms of topics for discussion.
Can I ask HSI a question? I know that when you look to shut down the dark web marketplaces, you're focusing on the suppliers and the sellers of drugs. But what's your message to people that may be thinking about buying an illegal drug on the dark web? What would you say to them? What are the risks to them of law enforcement following up and sort of so that they know that buying those drugs pose a real risk to them and is against the law?
So two things, Richard, and I was going to throw this out to the group too. As you had mentioned, kind of the start of this problem was pharmaceutical grade painkillers that proliferated. You mentioned the take-back programs. There was an opportunity as we move into fentanyl and substances produced in labs in China that have no quality control, and that people order these substances over the dark web and receive them here in the mail. Those folks are making pills or other capsules, and they're not scientists, and they're not pharmacists, and there's no quality control. So I think there's an educational aspect, and I'm not the expert in how to tell this story, but I think there's a difference between a pharmaceutical company produced painkiller or opiate versus what a guy in a basement somewhere in one of our cities and towns with a bunch of chemicals and a pill press trying to make these substances to put out on the street. I think people don't know anymore what they are actually ingesting, and I think that's there's been a false sense of confidence about certain pills that were out there and were available. I think the second concern, and this is basically me describing the water we're drowning in here, is and it's not helpful, but I'll say, you used to have to know a drug dealer in order to get drugs. Today, you can sit in your house with a computer and a connection to the dark net and engage with vendors overseas, use virtual currency or any one of its forms to pay for it, and enter it into the mail system, and you don't need to know the guy on the corner or the guy in the parking lot or a distribution network anymore. And I'll defer to my experts here in the field, PJ and Andre, to expand upon that. That's a great question.
Yeah, I'd say just like two things. I think the problem set is the problem has really metastasized in a way that we weren't really fully aware of. Partly technologically, that's just natural. Technology is agnostic; it does whatever, but it's being used for illicit purposes. People can get at it, like Mr. Benner said. People can get at this from their desktop computer or a mobile computer or anything, anywhere, It's very easy where they used to have to actually make more of an effort and go to somewhere where it was actually, you know, a little more dangerous, and they would think twice about it. So you have the access is one, and the second piece is the drugs. Quite frankly, are far, far more dangerous. They're more powerful. They can kill on contact. Doesn't have to be ingested anymore. It's not necessarily the intent, I'm sure. I mean, get rid of your consumer base, but that's occurring. In addition to that, even if you do get drugs that are appropriate, if you will, I mean, they're drugs. They're not what, you know, something you don't expect. They can have things in there that are completely unexpected because there's no quality control, and these are just being fabricated in various facilities. So you could have arsenic, you could have mercury in there, you can have you know, animal feces that have contaminated it. So even if the drug itself doesn't kill you, the other component materials can kill you. The only way, I mean, it's a whole of society approach for sure. Just like it was with child exploitation and the internet, and it blew up. You really, families and communities need to pay attention to what is being accessed and why, especially with children. That's where it starts, and it's the access and the metastasization of the drug and the problem. I don't know, Andre, do you have something else?
I would only add that when you look at this phenomenon in terms of the opioid crisis, we have to bear in mind and remember that it's transnational organized crime that has its tentacles intricately interwoven into this problem, that they derive the specified unlawful proceeds from this activity, and as such, when people engage in this behavior to acquire their own and in some instances distribute it, they are now in competition with transnational criminal organizations. And because you are in a situation or a scenario where you are encroaching on organized crime's turf and or territory, if you will, you are in danger of imminent threat of injury, to include death. And this phenomenon has the potential to increase violent crime in the communities that are policed and serviced by our local, state, and federal officials. So the invariable outcome of this could potentially lead to a rise in violent crime, property crime, and further plague our communities. So I would just sum it up and say, don't do it.
Let's just do one more discussion question, and we'll open it up for questions from the
Okay. I think we've tackled, you know, we've got some ideas out there on law enforcement's interaction with the community as far as education. I want to kind of take it back to the law enforcement angle for a second and put it out to the group. Is what are we missing in terms of the connectivity of federal, state, local law enforcement in terms of capacity building? So I know when it's time for everybody to respond to an investigation or a scene, we work seamlessly. We make the right phone calls. We do deconfliction. It's all hands on deck. But when we're not doing that activity, what else can we do to build capacity, whether it's training, awareness, targeting, joint initiatives that we're not doing already, and how do we do that?
Well, I think maybe if some of you all, I do hear that the need for recovery, you know, for beds and I know and for treatment facilities, and I think that's another area where we need to have probably a more comprehensive approach given the chronic, lifelong nature of addiction and the disease. So we want to have that person who has an overdose, you know, that we intervene then, that they get the diversion opportunity, which is to go into treatment instead of go to jail, and what kind of treatment do they get then? And we have a shortage of people who can even provide the treatment. I have heard tragic stories of families who, while they were waiting just for a few days for getting into a treatment program or to see somebody, had a relapse and died of an overdose. So we've seen the local families have been wonderful. I just give somebody who's worked with us a lot, the Chris Atwood Foundation, where they had Jenny Atwood had a brother who lost Chris to addiction, and they have been very active in talking to families and dealing with it and intervening and getting recovery coaches to them. Nick Yakub, who's a local a young man who battled addiction himself and is a wonderful star and face of recovery, and he's talking about training more recovery coaches to be at the hospitals, to be there supporting our law enforcement so that they are seeing in front of them somebody who, I know what you're going through, I went through this, here's a path out, and having lay recovery coaches, having, our churches and faith community, AA, NA, all of the different groups that, day to day can help people. But I think we do need to widen the picture of what we think of as recovery systems. It's one thing to get into a treatment program, but 30 days, 60 days isn't going to solve a lifelong chronic disease. We have to think of this in the more long-term way, and so I think that's something we need to get out there too as we have the messaging.
I totally agree with everything the Congresswoman said. And let me say, ONDCP, my office, we run the HIDA program, the High Intensity Drug Trafficking Area program. And what I hear from my HIDA directors is what's really helping is this collaboration with the health side, and our HIDA programs are working with CDC. And I know this is true all over the country. I'm just more familiar with what our HIDAs are doing. They're getting the health data. They're finding out where people overdose. They're geocoding the information, and law enforcement, with access to that health information, is able to go to those areas so that law enforcement knows, especially if the labs are fast and get you the results, they know that, say, there's a batch of fentanyl that's killing people, where they're not. If we have the data and we know where it is, law enforcement can go and work on taking down those drug dealers and drug traffickers that are killing folks.
Or even alerting. Aren't you in situations where you can get the data and you can alert through the local community? Say if you have an informant or something, they can at least put the word out that there's something on the street that is, we've just had 4 deaths. And you're able, is that working now? Are you seeing that?
Yeah, it's a HIDA mapping. It's in the process, and we're working to try to identify that.
Yeah, I'll bridge the chief. There's this OD mapping program, which officers can kind of carry with them on their phones, which will show them exactly where the overdose is, and that's some valuable data.
That's right. So we're working with HIDA on that. We also work with HIDA on the enforcement side of the house and knowing exactly who, working on who the suppliers are, who the bigger suppliers are. So we work it from a law enforcement standpoint. We also work it obviously from the health side, the response standpoint, and we also work with the mental health community, something that the Congresswoman brought up. We work very closely with the mental health community, and in fact, in Loudoun, we have reentry programs when people are coming out of the adult detention center as to give them resources that they need to try to follow up on this. So we're trying to hit it from, just about every angle, possible, but I think it is a collaborative effort, and certainly on the law enforcement standpoint, working and trying to exchange all this information, whether it's, information from HIDA, whether it's the Northern Virginia Gang Task Force and passing information along. We have a lot of different groups that we're all part of, and it's that information sharing and that working together that really makes a difference on that.
Thanks, everyone. I hate to cut off the discussion, but I think we want to open it up and make sure that our media colleagues who are here are able to have their specific questions answered. So with that, we will take any questions from the folks from the media who are here. Yes, sir.
Tom Howell, Washington Times. When the president made his big announcement yesterday, I suggest something's changing. There'll be new policies. Can you be specific about how, going forward, you will be attacking the dark web? What are you doing specifically? How are you pushing your borders out, as you said, to intercept these packages of fentanyl? What's different?
So just to repeat the question for the benefit of those who are watching, this question was from the Washington Times, and his question is essentially, what is new based on the president's announcement? Are there new efforts underway with the dark web, et cetera? So we will turn that over then to our folks on the panel.
Do you want to start, Richard? And
The announcement is a real shot in the arm for all of us who work on the drug problem, and I think it would be very catalytic for our efforts, for our collaboration with Congress to drive forward resources. There's more flexibility given throughout the health system to respond to the drug problem, and that's valuable. I think having the whole country understand that we are treating this like an emergency is also important, and I just think it takes up the level of focus into this country to a higher level. And I know, a lot of what the enforcement and the treatment centers, the prevention, These are real people working very hard all over the country in our communities. Knowing that the White House and the whole country are behind them is also something that's very valuable and gives focus to our efforts. Let me pass it back to ICE.
So the president's announcement makes for the men and women of HSI who are out there around the world combating this particular problem, among others, is a real shot in the arm, and it indicates that level of effort is being supported from the decision makers and the policy makers in D.C. So that's a big deal. The dark web, the dark net capacity building is something that we at HSI, through the Cybercrime Center, said this is something that we can do right now in furtherance of the President's order and declaration to build capacity among our state, local, and international partners. We've seen a 500% increase in support to our field offices for requests for assistance in darknet investigations through this center. And so it's time to open that aperture up and be more inclusive on a proactive basis with our state and local partners who may have the same requests out there. And hopefully they're finding avenues to get those answers. We're all learning at the same time.
So they'll come and train here. You'll have people, you'll have the capacity
Absolutely.
for training. So when my colleagues say they need more of this help in West Virginia or Iowa or anywhere, they can come here and get that kind of specialty training.
Absolutely, and that's the purpose behind, and thank you for putting a finer point on that, Congresswoman, because after this we hope to show you where we do the training here in the building and the training rooms and the technology that's available, and those are so those are two things that we're doing today in response, and I turn over to Richard
let me
if
add,
he has more.
So I want to make sure I'm responsive to your question. I think the announcement is powerfully symbolic, and that's important to the country. In addition, there are some specific things which this health emergency declaration allows, and let me just tick them off so I'll make sure I'm answering your whole question. The action allows for expanded access to telemedicine services, including services involving remote prescribing of medications used for treatment. It helps speed up any bureaucratic delays in the hiring process by allowing HHS to more quickly make temporary appointments of specialists with the tools and talents needed to respond to the health emergency. It allows the Department of Labor to issue dislocated worker grants to help workers who have been displaced from the workforce because of the opioid crisis get the help they need. And the action allows for a shifting of resources within HIV/AIDS programs to allow people eligible for those programs to receive substance abuse treatment, which is important considering the connection between HIV transmission and substance abuse. So I hope I've been clear. There's a set of very specific things that the declaration allows, but there's also a sort of a powerful overall push which the President's speech provides. Thank you.
All right, next question from the media. Anyone else? At Geneva. So let me read those questions out for the folks watching. This was Geneva Sands from ABC, and her question is, are there plans specifically to expand the Cybercrime Center in light of yesterday's announcements and our discussion today? And then also, where are we seeing the fentanyl source? Are we seeing it mostly from China through the dark web? So where is that being sourced from?
So I'll handle the first part of cyber, and then I'll let Zach Leckleitner talk about the sourcing. So the President's announcement yesterday actually goes very well with his previous executive orders in terms of combating transnational criminal organizations. And within those were certain opportunities for additional resources and law enforcement resources for ICE and HSI in particular. So we've already started expanding some opportunities here at the center, looking at different types of positions that might be suited to conduct internet-based law enforcement investigative activity. So looking at cyber-type investigator people that have that expertise. We've also been afforded the opportunity to do direct hiring. So that allows us to go out and recruit at targeted centers of excellence and universities and other places out there for people that have specific cyber experience, so that the people that we're hiring today, they kind of come to the table with this new wave of technology because they've been using it since they were little, and then they explored educational opportunities to expand that. That's something that you can't train a new law enforcement officer or agent on in 3 or 4 months at an academy. So we think there's a great opportunity to build upon the executive order opportunities with the President's announcement yesterday.
And then PJ on the sourcing, just be sure to use the mic.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, on the sourcing, certainly the preponderance of the materials are coming from Asia and specifically China. That's certainly where the preponderance are coming from. However, we have seen a lot from Mexico and a lot of precursors going down that way as well. One of the inherent things with this problem set is that it is global in nature, and the illicit activity will drive that supply kind of anywhere it needs to go. So currently that's the trend, and we don't anticipate that shifting that greatly. But this is very difficult, problem set to counter as well. So right now the preponderance is Asia, for sure. The majority of that is China, and then Mexico's in play as well from the precursors going down there, and that's also an issue.
Yesterday you had at the White House the indication that as they are visiting China, as our officials are there, that this is something that they are going to be more directly raising, and I think the President himself said he would raise it when he goes to China.
We can take 1 or 2 more questions from the media. Any other media questions? Yes, sir.
So you touched on, but as far as
your name and outlet, sorry.
Mark Seagraves, Channel.
Great, thanks.
If you could talk about, there are numbers coming out today that show the dramatic spike in overdoses, and much of it is attributable to what you guys alluded to, the really deadly nature of these black market fentanyls that are coming in from out of the country. Can you just talk a little bit about that and how easy, and you mentioned just how easy it is, because I guess it's small amounts that are shipped in. So someone can just kind of walk us through, like, how that starts in China and ends up in Loudoun County?
Yeah, and I just want to add on your question a little, because when we had our roundtable, one of the things I didn't realize is they're now sprinkling fentanyl on marijuana and pot. So you think about when you look at the legalization in some areas or decriminalization, and kids might think, oh, that's okay, it's safe, or even parents might think it's safe. Well, now this has been introduced into the marijuana market, because then it creates an additional addiction. So it's I had no idea that was going on. So in terms of the education efforts to make sure parents understand that in that whole arena, but I just wanted to add that in there.
Let me just repeat the question really quickly for the benefit of folks watching online. So this was Mark Seagraves from NBC here in D.C., and he asked specifically with the spike in deaths that we have seen as a result of deadly fentanyl and analogs, can someone walk through the process of where is this coming from, how are people getting it, and why is the ease of access so great?
You guys go first. Andre?
Sure, you want to take?
What we've seen in our investigations is that individuals utilize the Onion router for access to the darknet and to the illicit online marketplace. And it's relatively easy to enter search terms for the illicit contraband that you're seeking, whether it's a firearm, whether it's an opioid, or whether it's other controlled substances to include cocaine. Individuals are very easily able to access that online marketplace and facilitate a transaction. So of course they utilize virtual currency to include Bitcoin, and in some instances we've seen where there are Bitcoin ATMs that are currently stood up in locations throughout the National Capital Region. But in addition to that, you can also use money service businesses, Western Union, to facilitate payment for that illicit contraband. and provide particulars to include where the shipment should go. And that international parcel or express consignment is then shipped through services that coordinate with the U.S. Postal Service, and the package is ultimately inspected, or sometimes not inspected, at an express mail hub facility, and then is scheduled for delivery and delivered to the customer here in the United States. So it's relatively easy to facilitate that transaction.
So to make things more complicated and more challenging for law enforcement is there's no truth in advertising on the dark net. So these are online, like, marketplaces that anybody can put up, and we're seeing across the country examples of where a subject thought they were ordering a particular analog of fentanyl, a particular composition. In reality, wherever that order was fulfilled, they were just throwing anything in an envelope and sending it. And the potency is wildly across the board. There's no control. So a lot of times the people that are actually ordering from the underground marketplaces aren't even getting what they think they're getting, which adds a whole nother level of complexity to the stuff that they're actually putting out on the streets.
Yeah, okay, if I could add to that, completely agree. Our mail facilities, they're a new front in the fight against drugs, as important as the southwest border and other border facilities. But let me just add, the Mexican-based drug cartels are also a major contributor to the overdose problem. The cartels are driven to make money, and they have been expanding their product line. They produce very pure, potent heroin. They produce a blend which is 7% fentanyl that looks like and is sold as white heroin. People, as been said, people may be buying what they think is their normal dose of heroin, but they're really just buying fentanyl, so they don't know what they're getting. And they're also making these fake pharmaceutical pills in Mexico and the U.S. in massive quantities. When people are buying them with the logo of the pharmaceutical company on it, they think they're buying the pill that they used to get from the doctor, and maybe they can't get it anymore because they've been blocked. They go to the street, they think it's the same pill, but it's not. It contains fentanyl in uncontrolled dose, and it's very deadly and dangerous. So we're facing in this country a very dangerous entrepreneurial drug trafficking regime that really threatens the health of our citizens.
And with that, I'll ask our local law enforcement partners if they would join the panel up here and stand behind our folks on the panel so that we can offer the media a shot of everyone who's here collaborating today.
Richie, get up here.
Oh, Sean.
You're doing a lot of stuff. We know. Be shy.
With that, I'd like to thank you all very much for attending today's event. We hope that you were able to garner some additional, maybe new information about what we as a team are doing to fight back against this epidemic. If you have additional questions, I am from ICE Public Affairs. I'm happy to help you or direct you to colleagues from another agency if you have specifics for follow-up after. With that, thank you very much for coming. Thank you to our panel, to our local law enforcement partners who attended. We really, really appreciate it, and it will require continued teamwork to address this epidemic in our country. Thank you very much.
Thank you, James. Anybody that's interested in a quick tour,
And it's like the
we could make this the starting point.
Yeah, it is.
Oh, yeah,
I used
thanks.
to be nervous, but like now,
There you go.
I think I've read used to it.
Yeah, there's also a CNN declassified thing on it that's a little, it's quick. You know, it's half an hour and you get it all. Oh, thanks, man. Appreciate it. Yeah, it's always looking for
I know.
Yeah, I was like,
I'm going to take credit for it. You know, it's like I got all the credit, and I had to go see the president. I had a good excuse. Although I really
shoot me an email. I'll keep you on the hook. I'm local here at DC.
understand, like, when I make a commitment, it hurts me to know.
Yeah.
But, yeah, maybe another opportunity comes up. What are you doing?
Oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I will, and we do have a pretty good network there. This is Zach Watson, so he handles Baltimore in the state of Maryland.
I'm going to. They have me going to Maryland this year. So I'm driving out there.